Welcome to our deep dive into the vibrant world of early Christianity in Rome, back when the movement was more a lively patchwork than the organized institution it had later become.
Yeah.
We've got figures like Clement, Ignatius, Marcion, and others shaping the debates and practices of their day.
It's fascinating to think about how these early leaders were not just spiritual guides, but also active participants in fierce theological disputes. Their ideas really defined what being a follower of Christ meant back then.
Absolutely. Take, for example, Clement of Rome, truly one of the apostolic fathers. He penned First Clement, a document that called for order in the church and stressed the importance of apostolic succession. And all of that came just a few decades after Paul's time.
Right. That shows how quickly the church had to set up its own internal structure amid all the early chaos.
And let's not forget Ignatius of Antioch. On his grim journey to martyrdom in Rome, his impassioned letters called for unity under a single bishop, a concept that really established the hierarchical model we see later on. It's like he was saying, stick together, folks, even as the walls around you were crumbling.
Exactly. And those letters weren't just emotional. They were really strategic in shaping church authority. It's almost as if his words laid the blueprint for centuries to come.
Then there's Marcion of Sinope, a truly controversial figure. Marcion arrived in Rome around 140 CE and shook things up by completely rejecting the Old Testament and crafting his own canon. That forced the church in Rome to re-examine its own theology and, well, decide what they really stood for.
I always find it interesting how Marcion's radical positions pushed the center to clarify its beliefs. But isn't it a bit hasty to cast him only as a heretic? His challenge forced essential self-reflection, didn't it?
That's a great point. It's like his ideas, however unsettling, created a kind of crucible where the church's theology was really tested and forged, though admittedly many still view his stance as dangerously divergent.
Moving on, Valentinus is another striking character. This Alexandrian mystic, nearly elected Bishop of Rome, brought a Gnostic flavor with his secret knowledge and enigmatic teachings. His followers, the Valentinians, weren't a small bunch either. They rivaled Orthodox believers in number and influence.
Exactly. Valentinus, in many ways, represented the mystical side of early Christianity, a world where enlightenment came through secret wisdom rather than established doctrine. It's like he was promising that hidden inner light to those searching for more than just conventional teachings.
And then we have Justin Martyr. Yes, a philosopher from Samaria who took his arguments to Rome around 150 CE. His apologies and dialogue with Trypho are prime examples of blending Greco-Roman logic with Christian faith. It's as if he was saying, trust reason, folks, even in matters of belief.
Exactly. Justin was really about defending the faith through reasoned dialogue, and his approach helped bridge the gap between the intellectual traditions of the Roman world and the emerging Christian thought.
Yeah, indeed.
His work was like an early blueprint for apologetics.
Then there's Callistus, whose journey from being a slave to rising as Bishop of Rome is nothing short of remarkable. He even advocated for forgiving serious sins, a pretty radical idea at that time. It signified a shift towards a more inclusive, forgiving church culture.
Exactly, and that idea of inclusivity is echoed in many modern perspectives, isn't it? His stance was both daring and progressive for his era. It really makes you consider how much the church's social foundations were evolving rapidly.
And let's not overlook Basilides from Alexandria. Even though he was based there, his Gnostic teachings reached Rome and added another layer of complexity to the debates. His intricate cosmology and unique views on salvation contributed to the intellectual, almost chaotic environment of early Christian thought.
In many ways, all these figures, Clement, Ignatius, Marcion, Valentinus, Justin, Callistus, and Basilides, were not marginal or fringe. They were central players that led congregations, penned influential texts, and stirred up both internal and external debates. Even the Roman authorities took notice of their power and influence.
Yeah, it's striking how The very existence of these debates forced early Christians to, actually define what orthodoxy even meant.
Exactly. It wasn't a single leader or pristine set of ideas that birthed modern Christianity. It was more like a fiery, contentious, and creative explosion of thoughts, all clashing and merging in the streets of Rome. Mm-hmm. It's like a melting pot where ideas simmered and bubbled until they finally solidified into a more uniform doctrine.
And that melting pot brought along challenges. Some critics, like Irenaeus, later attacked these figures, especially those whose ideas strayed too far from what became accepted tradition. It shows that even in its formative years, Christianity was under constant scrutiny both from within and from external forces.
Sure does. And speaking of scrutiny, I do have a slight critique here. While we often view figures like Marcion as purely heretical for rejecting the Old Testament, isn't it sometimes a bit too simplistic to dismiss their contributions as merely destructive? They forced critical reflection and, in some ways, helped define the boundaries of Orthodox belief.
Exactly. It's a reminder that in any revolutionary period, there are always voices that challenge the mainstream and provoke deeper, more meaningful debates. And that's precisely what made those early days so dynamic.
Let's also talk about the nature of these early gatherings. Christianity in 2nd century Rome was hardly uniform. It was a series of underground house churches, each buzzing with its own set of beliefs and practices. Mm-hmm. It was a real battlefield of ideas, with each leader staking out their own territory in the spiritual landscape.
And it wasn't just theological debates. It was like, everyday conflicts among communities trying to figure out how best to live out their faith under immense external pressures from the Roman authorities.
Right. The constant tension created an environment where leaders had to be not just theologians, but also political operatives, and in many cases, martyrs. Yeah. Their struggles were as much about survival as they were about spiritual truth.
It's really wild to think about the stakes, how the evolution of early Christian thought was tied into power, influence, and even life and death situations.
Absolutely. And even though Rome was trying to figure out this strange new sect, the ideas these figures introduced have resonated through the centuries. It's like they laid the literal and metaphorical groundwork for all subsequent Christian thought. The impact of their intellectual and spiritual contributions is still discussed and analyzed today.
And that's why the story of early Christian leaders is so rich. It's not just a list of names, it's a narrative of transformation, struggle, and ultimately a quest for identity in a rapidly changing world.
Exactly. It's like a mosaic, each piece adding color and depth to the big picture of how Christianity emerged from a chaotic crucible into a major world religion. Mm-hmm. And every piece tells its own story.
Speaking of stories, what stands out to you the most about these early leaders and their challenges?
For me, it's the sheer diversity of thought and experience. I mean, here you have someone like Callistus, who rose from slavery and redefined forgiveness, versus a radical like Marcion, who reintroduced controversy by rewriting texts. It really underscores the unpredictable experimental nature of that era.
Absolutely. And it challenges our modern view that religious movements should be monolithic or entirely unified from the start.
Precisely. It's like the evolution of Christianity was built on a foundation of robust and sometimes downright messy debate.
Right.
There were so many voices, each insisting on their own vision of the truth.
And that creative tension, as messy as it might sound, was crucial. It forced early Christians to refine their beliefs, scribble down texts, and ultimately to define orthodoxy in a way that could withstand external challenges.
Exactly. If you think about it, the modern structured church is a product of that dynamic ferment, a time when the very act of believing required constant negotiation among diverse ideas. Mm-hmm. And that negotiation wasn't always pretty, but it was essential.
Truly. It's interesting to reflect on how the messy, transformative process of the early church contrasts with the more institutionalized, polished form of Christianity we see today.
Yeah, and it also tells us that the evolution of a belief system is never linear. It's like filled with contestations, contradictions, and sometimes unexpected breakthroughs.
Right.
Much like any great revolution or innovation in history.
And so, even though the earliest Roman Christians were often at odds with one another, their debates forged a legacy that still echoes in modern theological thought.
Exactly. Their conflicts, their writings, and even their martyrdoms all contributed to a foundational legacy that continues to shape religious traditions today. It's absolutely wild how history unfolds.
In the end, these early leaders remind us that religious evolution isn't about a single person or a single idea. It's about a vibrant, often chaotic mix of voices creating something wholly new.